On to our next speaker. We have speaking Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, who is the Senior Director with the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Dr. Charlebois is a professor in food distribution and policy in the faculties of management and agriculture at Dalhousie in Halifax. He's known as the food professor. His current research interests lies in the broad area of food distribution, security, and safety. He is one of the world's most cited scholars in food supply chain management, food value chains, and traceability. He has testified on several occasions before parliamentary committees on food policy related issues as an expert witness and has been asked to act as an advisor on food and agricultural policies in many Canadian provinces and other countries. And you likely have seen his interviews either in the print media or possibly on radio or TV. With that, I'll welcome Dr. Charlebois, and he will be addressing evolving food trends and their impact on our agri-food sector.
Well, thank you very much, Ingrid. Obviously, lots going on right now around the world and in Canada when it comes to food consumption. So I'll do my best to address most issues in the half hour or 45 minutes we have together. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I have a sweet spot in my heart for Manitoba. I used to live in Saskatchewan for a while, and I have some great friends in Winnipeg. Being in Halifax, I have to tell you, I actually miss the winters in the prairies. Winters in Halifax are weird. They're uncommitted. You get snow in the morning, thunderstorms in the afternoon. It's just weird. So I want commitment. So my parka is in the closet, and it always stays there all winter long here. So I miss the minus 20s and snow, and it's great. Anyways, I think I'll be back in Winnipeg in February, and I'm looking forward to it. So my talk today is very much about trends. I mean, what we do at the lab here is to understand what's going on. What are the things that are pushing consumers to buy different things, consume different things? So we'll look at that. I don't have a deck ready for you. I wanted to talk to you directly and use some of the data that we have at the lab. And by the way, if you want anything at all, any data that I'll be talking about today, you can actually go on our website. You just Google Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and you can actually go on our website and get all of our reports for free. They're both available in English and French. All of them are available in both English and French. So I encourage you to do that. I also have a podcast called The Food Professor. If you enjoy podcasts, well, we have a podcast. We've had it for about 2 years now, and it's one of the top podcasts in food in Canada, which is great. It's called The Food Professor. It's available on Spotify, Apple, Google, and Simplecast as well. So I encourage you to go on, and we try different Canadian products. We have guests from all over the country, all over the continent, actually. And we talk about food issues, things that we're doing at the lab. We talk about challenges that we're facing really as an industry, and things that perhaps government should be thinking about. So we've had politicians invited to our podcast as well. So yeah, like I said, lots going on right now. Let's first talk about the big elephant in the room affecting pretty much everyone. It's food inflation. Just this morning, we saw StatsCan CPI come out for November. So the food inflation rate, if you didn't know, is now at 4.7%. So it's basically getting closer to 5%. It is the highest point in 6 years. So you can say what you want about StatsCan, but it is an indicator showing that really things are getting more expensive. And when things get more expensive for the consumer, obviously it will force people to behave differently. They will make different choices as well. They will prioritize certain things, and we'll talk about how that can work. But essentially, when you have a society investing more on food, obviously expectations will change, and the way they perceive and prioritize food in their lives will change as well. And it's not necessarily for the worse. It could actually be for the better. So this could actually be an opportunity for the entire food industry from farm to fork, I think. You see, the way I see what's happening with food inflation right now is that we are departing an era of cheap food. We actually kind of started that process about a decade ago, after the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. We saw a shift. All of a sudden, like for the longest time, the average household in Canada was spending about 9.2% of its budget on food. Um, and in America, in the United States, it's actually close to 6%. So those are pretty low percentages historically. In the 1970s, it was actually close to 15%. So you can see that really food has taken is not as significant financially in our lives than it used to be. But I think things are starting to shift again towards not the 15%, but we are expecting that percentage to increase a little bit, similar to what we would see, for example, in Europe, where percentages are actually close to 15%, for example. So that's really something that you want to keep in mind. If you are in the food industry, if you're producing food, distribution food, if you're a supplier, uh, well, first of all, I have to thank you very much for doing what you're doing. I know there's a lot of criticism, a lot of questions related to what's happening right now in the industry, but I must say, I've been in awe with what I've seen across the country since the beginning of a pandemic. Miracle after miracle, the industry has delivered, making Canada food secure, which is really awesome. However, of course, we can't really overlook issues like supply chains, which is impacting the entire world, labor, which is impacting the entire world, climate, which is impacting the entire world. I mean, Sherry's presentation was very much about how do you actually mitigate the effects of Mother Nature and so on and so forth. And so all of these things are making the production of food way more complicated than just 5 or 10 years ago. And that's not going to change. It's only going to continue. And so I'm not sure Canadians actually appreciate how complicated things have been or have become, but it is what it is. And that's why I think when prices increase, I'm not overly concerned about food inflation overall. I think we need inflation. Obviously, at 5%, it's starting to reach a point where families will actually fall behind. I'm more concerned about food affordability, to be honest. Wages aren't there. And in fact, just to give you a piece of data, according to the UN, Canada was ranked 18th last year in 2020 when it comes to food affordability. So we're not first, but we're not 150th. But here's the problem. We've actually gone down to 24th this year in 2021. And my guess, looking at what's happening around the world, we may actually see Canada drop even further. And people will know that. People are noticing at the grocery store, especially at the meat counter with proteins. It's incredible. I mean, this year, really the big story were proteins, animal proteins. Next year, it's going to be dairy and food service. And food service is, we are expecting restaurants to increase prices. Their input cost is going up, labor cost is going up. Demand is actually is going to be shifting, unfortunately for food service, but people are going to be spending more time at home. We are looking at a more domesticated marketplace. People will be living, working from home. In fact, according to one of our studies, which we released a few months ago, 70% of the workforce in Canada, by the end of 2022, which is next year, 70% of the workforce in Canada will be working from home at least 5 days a month, every month. So think about your relationship with food when you're at home versus when you're at work. Think of the restaurants, think of the coffees, think of the commute. You have more time to think. You have more time to plan. The way you consume will be different. When you consume food will be also different. The snacks, everything. So that shift, that towards domestication, is really going to be redefining entire food market overall. And I actually think that this could be a great opportunity. And this is why we're starting to see the rise of ghost kitchens, the rise of dark stores. And so you can see that everyone is looking at the supply chain very differently because it's more democratized. Consumers are online. They're looking at food beyond the major grocers. They're looking at food beyond the major chains. They're actually looking at buying food from different places. Um, with farmers, I mean, there's been some really interesting projects. I spoke to some groups, farmer groups, and some of them are actually trying to set up a ghost kitchen to serve meals prepared on the farm, delivered to city dwellers. Can you imagine? And a ghost kitchen, if you don't know what it is, it's basically a box, no pickup counter, no dining hall. You basically have Uber Eats, Skip going there to pick up meals, and those meals are delivered to people's homes. And they want to connect with the farms because we've been talking about supply chains. We've been talking about the well-being of farmers and processors, and people are interested in knowing more about working conditions. And so the pandemic really has not only made the supply chain more transparent, but it has made it the pandemic has actually enticed people to understand it even more, understanding the different nodes, the different people involved. Like I said, I mean, right now we're seeing labor disputes being settled. A lot of employees are making more money, but obviously, as you guys know, in a high volume, low margin environment, you have to adjust prices. And this is kind of what's going on right now. And I've been trying to explain that to media. Making food is not like making cars. Margins aren't the same. And dynamics within the supply chain, starting with farm gate economics, aren't the same either. And often people don't necessarily know that, but it has to be recognized. But more and more, you're seeing people trying to understand what's happening around the world. So the 3-meal institution is actually being revisited right now. Actually, we have a survey coming out tomorrow, just a little scoop for you. A lot of Canadians are rethinking the 3 meals. They're looking at snacking and looking at eating 4 times a day, 5 times a day, instead of just 3 times, just because of the fact that people are working from home, sometimes twice a day instead, and having some snacks along the day. So all of that really is getting people to look at meat, fish, pasta, dairy, cheese, everything very differently. What role will you play in that chain? It will actually be impacted by where people work, how people live. Obviously the split between service and retail is also being revisited. Before the pandemic, I'm not sure if you knew this, but about 35% of our budget, of our food budget, was dedicated to food consumed outside the home. So at the restaurant, 35%. So the split was 65-35. On March 13th, or in March 2020, that ratio went down to 991. So big shift. Now we're back to about 27-73. That's basically the split that we're at right now. And I'm not sure it's going to change anytime soon. So these are, I mean, we're talking 7%. It may not sound like a lot, but 7% is probably about $20 billion worth of business, which is a lot. I mean, you can actually support many grocery stores with $20 billion. And 20 billion is close to Sobeys business, really, at 27, 20, 26 or 27 billion. So you can see that really it adds up, that people will be spending their money in different places. But there is hope. Now let's forget Omicron. Let's forget about the negative press going on right now. I must say, Canadians are actually out there again. 65% of Canadians in the last month, okay, in the last month, actually has gone to a restaurant. So people are active, but they're not spending the same way. They're not buying that bottle of wine. They're not having that extra dessert. They're very careful and more frugal. And this is what's going to happen in 2022. Consumers will be trading down, trading sideways. They'll be looking for deals. They'll be looking for the enjoy tonight deals. They'll be looking for rebates. Frugality is going to be back, similar to what we saw in the 70s during the great oil crisis. People will be looking to buy things at a discount all the time. So they'll be looking at flyers, they'll be using coupons, and so on and so forth. That's the reality for 2022 and probably beyond as well. So that's one thing that we need to consider. The other thing that's happening also is the online business. And this is really where things get really excited. Skip the Dishes actually announced yesterday that it was building 38 dark stores across the country to support their e-commerce strategy. So Skip the Dishes, which is based out of Winnipeg, the company is known to deliver food from restaurants. It started that way. Now it was bought, but now it's looking at food retail, and they want to build dark stores. Now a dark store is a micro fulfillment facility which doesn't accommodate consumers. It's there to support e-commerce orders, to fulfill e-commerce orders for a small market. That's basically it. So they'll probably build a dark store in Halifax, in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Winnipeg, in Brandon, probably in different places to really support their online strategy as much as possible. And they don't want to charge you. That's on. So if you order $25 or more, they won't charge you a fee. So this is kind of what we're seeing more and more. 15% of Canadians in the last month have actually ordered food retail online. 15%. So if you haven't bought into this online stuff, well, talk to a millennial, talk to a Generation Z person. They'll tell you, especially with kids, they're going to tell you this is convenient. Even if you charge me $4 or $5, this is convenient. I don't have to go get out more. Of course, because people will be working from home, people will try to figure out ways to get out of home, but more and more people are starting to really think, well, if I can get my food delivered and not waste time and not commute or anything like that, why not? And get someone to actually empowering someone else, a total stranger, to do your groceries. A concept that was totally foreign for a lot of Canadians only 2 years ago. Now that 2% is now 15%. And for restaurants, it's 28%. In last month, 28% of Canadians have actually ordered food online. So as a farmer, if you're a farmer out there, you got to think about the market very differently and say, well, okay, maybe there is a new model emerging. I think there is a new model emerging, something interesting for you to consider, how to connect with the consumer. There are endless possibilities now because of how democratized the supply chain actually is compared to just a few years ago. It's amazing. Now, some of the changes that we're expecting in the future. So for one, we actually believe at the lab that the cost of food will continue to rise. I know that a lot of people actually think that that prices will drop eventually. I don't think so, and that's due to a lot of things happening around the world. So the supply chain is going to get more efficient, but as soon as you get some tension, it will really impact the cost of food. And right now, what we're seeing is a global recovery, a global economic recovery. But it's like steering a cruise ship with paddles. You will eventually get to your destination, but it will take more time. And when it takes more time, it costs more money. And I think things are only going to get a little bit more complicated. But the other thing I want to talk to you about is the carbon tax. The carbon tax, or the fact that we are pricing carbon, and not only in Canada but around the world, the industrialized world, there is a momentum towards a carbon market, pricing carbon, and this is, in my view, a game changer. So I was proud to testify before Parliament in June for Bill C-206 to exempt farmers from paying a carbon tax. And I was actually quite pleased to know that, to learn that we did win the vote. I was testifying against the David Suzuki Foundation. And what I heard from the foundation, I find it very troubling, because they were saying, well, if farmers need to do their part for the environment, well, they do. They're environmental stewards. Of course, they're actually playing their part. But when I actually was hearing that, you can clearly hear that they absolutely have no understanding of what farm gate economics are, or what price taking economics are. And so that's why I think I was glad that farmers did get that vote. However, I think things will get more complicated. So we're slowly marching towards a carbon tax of $170 a metric ton. And nobody really knows what's going to happen to food prices, of food affordability, how it will impact supply chains. But let me tell you something, some things that I'm seeing right now. I think as a result of a market that prices carbon even more, we're seeing more nearshoring, more onshoring. Kraft Heinz investing in Canada, Loving Lean Calgary, Rocket, Merit Foods, Nestle. There's more investment in processing in Canada, much more so in the last 2 years than in the last 10 years. Now, why is that? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that companies are now looking at servicing markets very differently. Before, a few years ago, a company that was designing a supply chain looked at their supply chains like a table with water. You put water on a table, the water will always go to the lowest point. So if you needed to grow something, you went to the cheapest place. If you wanted to go and package something, you went to the cheapest place. The other day, my daughter actually brought me a can of peaches, and on that can it was saying produced in Argentina, packaged in Malaysia, and we were here in Halifax looking at this, and we were about to eat peaches, and we grow a lot of peaches in Canada, and we gotten to accept that. And with globalization, it's fine. But as the world changes, I actually think that companies will be compelled to think at supply chains a little bit differently. And that cheapest spot won't be as cheap anymore. We were expecting that about 30 years ago, but things actually just got more intense in Asia, for example, and in South America. But now the world is kind of one. I mean, the economy has grown, which is fantastic. But I actually do think that there's a bright future for Canada's agri-food sector, from farm to fork. And the drum that I'm banging a lot on is processing in the last few years. Why? Because in order to support farmers, You can't support farmers. There's no other better way to support farmers than to focus more on processing. If you have a decent, forceful processing sector, you can support farmers. And this is why I'm a bit of a fan of Protein Industries Canada, which is a super cluster out of Saskatchewan, but it supports different initiatives from across the prairies. What they've done so far is absolutely phenomenal. And I think what PIC is bringing to the table, no pun, is an open innovation model, which is something we've never had before in agri-food in Canada. Uh, the most brilliant food supercluster we've had in Canada was President's Choice from Loblaws. But what has come out of that supercluster is amazing. Lots of innovation, but it was only for Loblaws. Now, PIC is kind of creating a case study for open innovation, and I think it's going to be quite beneficial. And I actually think that perhaps we should think about doing something similar for animal proteins as well, and different kind of commodities. What's happening in the prairies in particular, and in Manitoba is fantastic. And for Manitoba in particular, the protein strategy I think is the best in the country. It's democratic, it's balanced, it's thinking about animal, vegetable, both, all dimensions of agriculture. You don't have that elsewhere. Elsewhere in Canada, you still have that stomach share mentality, which is really a backward way of thinking, especially when you're looking at a consumer that is looking at value, that is looking for choice, that is looking for quality as well. And so I think, because I was there when the protein strategy was revealed in Winnipeg a few years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. That approach was very, very strong, I think, and I still believe that. And I said that to the crowd in I think it was in January 2020. I still believe that the approach is actually quite sound, and I encourage I've encouraged other provinces to look at that model in Manitoba as much as possible. One legacy to COVID, though, is how we perceive risk, and this is something that is critical. We've been talking about public health. We've been talking about viruses. We've been talking, and I mean, for almost 2 years now. So it's ingrained, especially the kids. I mean, the masks and everything. I mean, it's I have 4 young children, and we see it as parents. Really, kids aren't going to be reacting the same way as we did. So when you think about food packaging, when you think about how you convey information, how you use technology with the QR codes, hated the QR code when we started the pandemic. Never used one, and since then, and Ingrid just spoke about using it like QR. Everyone's using it to have access to information. Another opportunity for the industry to again tell the story. If you're a farmer, a processor, doesn't matter. If you're out there and you have a story, the QR code, which was invented, by the way, in Japan in 1994 for the car industry, not the food industry, the car industry was invented because we needed something else than the code, the barcode, to contain more data. So it's all there. It's always been there to kind of make the agri-food sector more attainable, more real, I guess, and to tell the story, which is often misleading. I mean, you guys look at social media all the time about genetic engineering, gene editing, the use of pesticides. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Well, guess what? Because of the pandemic, I think there are better ways to connect with the public, I think. And we need to be more strategic about that as well. And this is going to continue, I think. Another thing that's happening that's I mean, when it comes to innovation, we're just starting here. I've been involved with some projects related to cultured food. Imagine. Now, Singapore just actually made it legal to sell cultured chicken. Yes, I'm talking about lab grown stuff. Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm not saying that in Canada there's a lot of appetite for this. Actually, only a quarter of Canadians would be willing to taste lab grown food or lab grown made food. But think about other places, and this is why Genomics Ontario's report last week encouraging VCs to invest in culture and media is, I think, a good idea, because I think in other places around the world there's not as much space as in Canada. There's not as much luxury. I mean, let's face it, we've been blessed with a lot of land here, a lot of resources, great resources, clean air, clean energy. We got lots going for us. We can share, but in some places there's no space, like Singapore, for example. So we need to think globally about how people are going to eat. And I actually think that cultured food will become legal in Canada by 2025, and it's probably going to become legal in the United States before then. So we got to be ready for it. I think we missed the boat on proteins, on vegetable proteins. We're catching up now, which is great, but we missed the boat. We should have started pick and other things about a decade ago, at least. So we're catching up. And I think on the cultured food front, we shouldn't miss that boat yet again. And of course, there is a role to play for farmers that are out there already when it comes to cultured food and cellular agriculture in general. So in a nutshell, I'm looking at the time and I'm running out slowly. And I know that Ingrid wants to run a Q&A with the audience. Um, Information consumption, people are thirsty for information. We've been consuming a lot of information during COVID. I mean, people watch TV, and so we got to think about how to convey information to the public as much as possible, and consumers will be there to listen, I think. I was actually just visiting last week a salmon farm here in Nova Scotia, a sustainable salmon farm, and it's all sustainable. It's small scale. It's about, it's nothing like Clearwater or Cook, but the facilities were unbelievably. So it cost about $50 million to build, to produce sustainable salmon. So in other words, it's not salmon that eats chicken. And by the way, salmon in aquaculture does eat chicken. It's legal, parts of chickens, which for some people may be, oh no, it's not natural. Salmon don't eat chicken in nature. But at that facility, it's a farm, but they try to recreate the natural environment for salmon. And I was skeptical, went to the shop, bought their salmon and bought regular salmon, and it did taste different. Yes, less slimy. It was incredible. It was more expensive. It was probably about 30% more expensive, but the difference was unbelievable. So there's lots of that. And I think their sales actually are up about 50% in the last year alone. Why? Because people are looking for these products and they're out there on social media connecting with the public, telling their story through QR codes and everything else. And the last thing I want to talk about is clean labeling. Clean labeling, and what I mean by that clean labeling is that people want to know what's in their food, and they want to understand what's in their food, and they want to know if what they're eating is of quality. And this is not going to end. And I know there's been a lot of the food industry has been criticized for not coming out clean as much, and I think this is something it's going to continue. There's going to be more pressure on naturalizing food. We've been talking a lot about it in the last in the last decade, I guess. But now the gardening rate has gone up in the Western world. In Canada, the gardening rate is now 17%. And before the pandemic, it was actually 12%. People are gardening more. They're growing their own food. And yes, it could have an impact on food demand. I don't think it does, because people are realizing that gardening is a lot of work. But at least they're aware that Mother Nature is not perfect. That carrot that comes out the ground is not perfect all the time. That tomato is not perfect all the time. So you can see that really um, food literacy has gone up in Canada. People are more aware of what's happening out in the field. They're more curious. They've learned more recipes. They are more aware of different ingredients. And that really will lead to more opportunities as we exit the pandemic, I think. Food literacy is a good thing for kids, for adults, everyone. And it's also good for the industry, because when you're interacting with someone who actually knows what he or she is if someone actually understands agriculture a little bit more, not perfectly, but a little bit more, then that's great. And one last point before I go to Ingrid, the pet economy. Do not underestimate the fact that there are more pet owners. Do you know how many new pet owners we have in Canada compared to March 2020? More than 3 million. Yes. And if you're a pet owner in the city, you will end up seeing animals very differently. And this is something I just want to plant a seed here, because I actually do see something there. Canada's pet economy was very big before the pandemic, but it has grown substantially since then. We have more pets than kids in Canada, and that really will impact how people will see food. If they take care of an animal, and they'll start thinking about animal proteins, it may actually, I don't think that it's going to make a bunch of new vegans, but it will get people to think differently about, how agriculture should treat livestock, for example. And so expectations will shift. And that's something I want to share with you this afternoon. So, or rather this morning. So on that note, I will stop now, and I think we have some time for a Q&A session. Since it is live, I can actually talk to people. So Ingrid, back to you.
All right. Currently, we don't have any questions in the Q&A. Hopefully, we will have some shortly. I was just wondering about some of the things that you had talked about with the protein strategy. The key point that you thought Manitoba was doing right was just the whole scope of.
It's the scope, absolutely. I think the scope was inclusive. I mean, basically, when I was there in Winnipeg, I guess it was last year, or early last year, everyone was in the room. A lot of people were in the room, and that's not something I actually saw in other provinces and other parts, because there seems to be, there's some tensions, and I think it has a lot to do with the Beyond Meat factor. Beyond Meat really has created this friction between animal and vegetable, but now Beyond Meat is floundering. I mean, I think you guys are aware, it's in the news. Its stock price is dropping, revenues are dropping, it's losing money now, but it doesn't mean that vegetable proteins are dropping. Actually, sales are up 15-20% steady a year. There's more competition in the market, and the new players in the market are absolutely bang on with their approach. They bring in, first of all, a product with better texture, and they don't compare themselves with beef or chicken or pork. It's just a unique experience, which is what we need for our vegetable protein. And that's kind of what I saw when I read the protein strategy in Manitoba. Maybe some people don't agree, but I actually was very supportive of the strategy back then. So there you go.
Good. I see that John Hurd has his hand raised. John?
Sure. Thank you, Ingrid. My question is, I don't know why I've been kept out of the question room, but here's my question orally. What does food inflation do to the demand and prices for food products that are already premium priced? And specifically, I'm thinking about like organic production.